So our last snippet for this week looks at confirmation controversies during the H.W. Bush administration. So Reagan serves until 1988. He's succeeded by his vice president, George H.W. Bush, who serves one term. Bush gets two nominations who wind up being very, very different justices. So the first comes early in the administration when this man, William Brennan, who was an Eisenhower nominee and who had drifted to the left during his time on the court, was by far the most liberal justice on the court. Or one of the two most liberal justices on the court by the time we get to the late 1980s, announces his intent to retire. Bush saw what happened to Reagan with the Bork nomination. Democrats are still in control of the Senate. They will be in control of the Senate throughout the Bush presidency. Bush goes to his advisors and says, "Look, what I want is a conservative." Bush had this odd situation in the Republican Party where a lot of conservative activists were kind of distrustful of him. They saw him not incorrectly as kind of moderate at heart. And so he often uses judicial appointments as a way of proving his conservative credentials. He says, look, we need a conservative, but we need someone who can get through this Democratic Senate. And Bush's chief of staff, John Sununu, who was the former governor of New Mexico, says, look, I have this great guy from New Hampshire. He was a state judge in New Hampshire that had been appointed to the First Circuit Court of Appeals, which is based in Boston, by Reagan. He has a very, very limited public record. I know he's a strong conservative. Sununu was telling Bush, but it will be very, no one can attack him like they attack Bork because he just hasn't written very much in terms of opinion. And so the Bush administration eventually goes with this choice, and they nominate David Souter as their nominee. Souter will ultimately serve around 2 decades on the court. By the time he leaves the court in the Obama administration, he's a consistently liberal vote and will be a moderate liberal vote almost from the start. It turns out that the stealth record in this case really was stealth, and Souter was actually secretly a moderate or even a liberal, and people thought that he was a conservative. The irony here is that liberal organizations and politicians, I have quotes here on the screen you can read from the president of the National Organization of Women, and then down at the bottom here is Senator Kennedy, fulminate against Souter. I mean, they portray him as this radical right-wing reactionary who's a misogynist and is going to destroy women's rights. And it's a reminder that you always have to take these political criticisms with a grain of salt. I mean, these are just sort of embarrassing critiques in retrospect, given Souter's actual record on the court. Souter's liberalism it manifests itself almost immediately, and he and the Bush administration starts taking strong criticism from conservatives, and that leads to how the second nomination that Bush will have plays out. In 1991, the court's first and only African-American justice, Thurgood Marshall, is in very, very poor health. He wants to remain on the court until a Democrat is elected president, so a Democrat can replace him. But it's clear that by 1991 he can't hang out any longer, and so he submits a resignation. And the Bush people want to replace him with a black candidate. So, there's this sense that it's important to have an African American on the Supreme Court, but they also want someone who is conservative. They want someone, again, the Bork lesson. You don't want someone with a big paper trail. And they quickly settle on Clarence Thomas. Charismatic figure with a very, very compelling personal story. He was born into poverty in Georgia, went to a good Catholic liberal arts college in Massachusetts called Holy Cross, and then graduated from Yale Law School, one of the 2 or 3 best law schools in the country. Had been a Reagan administration official in a variety of positions. Was known as a sharp critic of the civil rights establishment, of affirmative action. Sort of a major figure in Black conservative circles in the 1980s. Briefly is nominated as a federal judge, so doesn't have a long paper trail, and then is nominated by Bush. He has support not just from conservatives. His chief patron is a moderate Republican senator named John Danforth from Missouri. This looks like just a tremendous nomination by Bush. It's he can't be attacked as abandoning a Black representation on the Supreme Court, but he's going to replace Marshall, who is the most liberal person on the court, with Brennan having retired, with Thomas, who will be quite possibly the most conservative person on the court. It's hard for Democrats to attack Thomas because Democrats have been so, the idea is, can Democrats, who are the diversity party even in the 1980s and early 1990s, say, we're skeptical of an African American on the court. And then in the middle of Thomas's confirmation fight, an allegation of sexual harassment, which is an issue which of course has existed for a long time in terms of the workplace, but which issue that didn't get lots of media attention or even legal attention in the 1970s and 1980s. An allegation of sexual harassment is made against Thomas by a former employee of his when he worked in the federal government, named Anita Hill, who had then left the federal government and joined the law faculty at Oklahoma University. And Hill says that when they both worked together, that Thomas, the proposition to her was sexually crude towards her, created a hostile environment in the workplace. This is occurring in the middle of the hearings. The Hill allegations had been made previously, but the then chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Joe Biden, hadn't chosen to call Hill initially as a witness. The Hill allegations get leaked to National Public Radio, and a firestorm ensues. Thomas immediately issues a statement denying it. Feminist groups argue that Biden had been insensitive to Hill's rights. They demand that the hearings be reopened. Biden, tries to work out a deal with Republicans to do so. Eventually, they agree that they will rehear from Thomas on this issue, and also hear from Hill. Thomas opens with a blistering attack on the Judiciary Committee that, for reasons that you'll hear in this clip, puts Democrats on the defensive.
Did not occur.
When it came time for him to publicly respond to the allegations, Thomas turned the tables on his interrogators and, for all intents and purposes, ended the debate.
This is a circus. It's a national disgrace. It is a high-tech lynching for uppity blacks who in any way deign to think for themselves. And it is a message that unless you kowtow to an old order, you will be lynched, destroyed, caricatured by a committee of the U.S. Senate rather than hung from a tree.
This is very strong rhetoric from Thomas, and this is it's a rare hearing that dissatisfies, that angers both sides. Feminist groups, Black women, professional women argue that a committee of 14 white men or 14 men was disrespectful to Hill, that they asked her questions that seemed guilt presuming, that they didn't accept her testimony in good faith. Thomas and lots of conservative Black groups and conservatives in general argue that this committee of 14 whites, again all of them were men, were disrespectful to an African American who, as Thomas says on this clip, did not reflect the consensus view of the civil rights establishment. Biden largely loses control of the hearings. The Democrats make this catastrophically stupid decision to do most of the questioning in the second round of questions to Thomas, to coordinate their questions through Howell Heflin, a moderate, even conservative Democrat from Alabama. But you get this caricature of this Alabama white Democrat with a deep Southern accent questioning an African American candidate. The visuals here are not good, and in the end, Thomas is confirmed by what was then the closest confirmation vote to a Supreme Court nomination in American history. Nowadays, this sort of thing seems routine, 52 to 48. The striking thing about the Thomas confirmation is kind of a reverse phenomenon what we saw with Bork. There is only one Republican senator, Jim Jeffords, a very liberal Republican from Vermont, who votes against Thomas's confirmation. Some of the other moderate or liberal Republicans, for instance, John Chafee from Rhode Island, vote in favor. And the other thing you'll see here is that there are a number of conservative or moderate Democrats who vote in favor of Thomas, and this is ultimately why he's confirmed. David Boren from Oklahoma, John Breaux from Louisiana, Deacon Cini, we encountered in the Panama Canal Treaty, from Arizona, Alan Dixon, the only Northern Democrat to vote for Thomas. Dixon was a Democratic senator from Illinois and will wind up losing his seat as a result of this vote. Jim Exon, a conservative Democrat from Nebraska, Wyche Fowler, a fairly liberal Democrat from Georgia, Fritz Hollings from South Carolina, Bennett Johnston from Louisiana, Sam Nunn from Georgia, Chuck Robb from Virginia, Richard Shelby, at that point a Democrat, now a Republican, from Alabama. One of the striking things here, you see lots of Southern Democrats who voted in favor of Thomas. They are hearing from their African American constituents that they believe Thomas was treated unfairly, and so these Southern Democrats who need black votes to be reelected are willing to give Thomas the benefit of the doubt. Thomas is something of a blank slate when he's nominated and confirmed. He will wind up being a very, very conservative member of the court, and of course is still on the court. So that's what we have for snippets from this week. Hope everyone is well.